What's up, Do More family? This is Elena, and I'm coming to you from Glamour Studios. I am located in Collinsville, which is a tiny town with the world's largest ketchup bottle. So there's a fact that you probably didn't care about. Let's learn a little bit about what white balance is and why you should give a shit. One of the big things I see that kind of separates artists for me is skin tones. That's a huge thing. I have people all the time that are like, I can't get my skin tones right. They always seem off. And there's a couple reasons for that. And I'm going to kind of walk you through some of those reasons so you can fix that. And then I'm going to tell you how you can use those techniques to also creatively light your images and give you some different effects without having to change too much. So I hope you're excited. I'm super excited. Another thing that can really affect your output from your camera is profiles, and I just want to briefly touch on this because it could literally be its own tutorial, but there are plenty of tutorials out there that cover this, so I definitely recommend looking for them. But essentially, when you're taking a photo, the image that you see on the back of your screen is a JPEG preview. So that's not necessarily the settings that are burned into the raw photo, because we all shoot in RAW, I'm assuming. But that's kind of the rendering of the preview that you get based on the camera's profile that you chose. So for instance, when I shoot camera vivid because I'm colorblind and most colors look brown to me. So I need something that gives me the most saturated color so I can see where I'm going to go with the image later. If I import from my camera into Lightroom, and I shoot with a Sony a7R III, when I import, it automatically converts my images to Adobe RAW. And Adobe is awful for, at least for my Sony, on color balance. It looks completely different than it does in the back of the camera. It looks different than what I shot. It's bad. So there's things called native profiles, and you can find them in your Lightroom on the menu. Next to profiles, there's a little tab. You can click that. You should be able to locate your specific camera profiles there. If not, again, you can Google this. You can just put native profiles Lightroom for whatever your camera is, and it'll explain to you how to import those. So it's really important that if you're shooting on, like for instance, with me, I'm shooting Vivid on my Sony. When I import it, I want to see it the way that I shot it. I want to see it with that preview, that profile baked in. So I'm going to go and I'm going to convert mine over to Vivid profile so I can start from exactly what I saw when I took the picture. All white balance is the way that your camera interprets the scene. So just like you don't want to necessarily shoot on auto, you don't want to shoot on auto white balance. And there's multiple reasons for that. So my biggest reasons why I don't shoot on auto white balance is because it lacks consistency, meaning that as you move around the scene, the color balance is going to change within the camera, meaning that later when I go to edit and I want to apply, one setting across a set of images, it's not going to be exactly the same because the camera's changing the white balance on me. The other reason why I want to be able to do my own white balance is because I like to be able to see what I'm getting in camera, because when I see it in camera, then I'm able to add to it in camera, and I'm seeing things that I maybe wouldn't have seen if I had waited till later to adjust it. So basically, white balance is the way your camera captures colors in different lighting situations. No lighting situation is going to be the same. So it really depends on what you're going for, what mood you want, and how much correction you want to give to your image. Kelvin is a measurement of the color of temperature. We use 2000 to about 10,000, I believe is what my camera does. So 2000 would be very warm, think candles, okay? And they're very orange, glowy. That would be 2000 Kelvin. And we go to the middle of the scale, which is about 5600 Kelvin. That is, your kind of average daylight outside white balance, okay? And then it goes all the way up to 9 or 10,000, and that is, think very heavy shade, very blue, so you have very, very orange, one scale, and then you have very, very blue on the other. Somewhere in there is where your perfect white balance is going to be, or your creative white balance is going to be. All we're trying to do is, if something is too orange, we're adding blue. It's basic color theory. So orange and blue are opposite on the color wheel. I totally was going to show you, but I don't know where my color wheel is, but maybe I'll insert a picture here. So blue and orange are opposite color wheel, meaning that if you put them on top of each other, they cancel each other out. So if something is too orange, you're going to add blue to bring it more to a neutral tone. If something's too blue, you're going to add orange to bring it to a more neutral tone. I realized that I wanted to take a moment to kind of visit the different color temperatures and white balances that are preset in our cameras, and when they work, when they don't work, and kind of how they work. So basically, when you're shooting in auto white balance, your camera's taking in the whole entire kind of scene, and it's averaging it out, and it's trying its best to make the profile neutral, or the image neutral. So as you can see here, I went ahead, I set this over here to auto just to see how it would have been in camera, and you can see that it's pretty good. It's not bad. This is outside. I do have some constant lights on, you can kind of see there, but in overall terms of her her skin is not terrible, but it's still not exactly where I would be. And let me just shoot this how I would have shot it. There we go. So, and this is kind of why I was talking about those profiles. As you can see, that makes a huge difference. So, looking at this, the way that the auto white balance works, and I use auto white balance and color temperature interchangeably in here because basically they're the same thing. So, if you have an image and the camera thinks that it needs to be warmed up, it's going to add orange. If it thinks it needs to be cooled down, it's going to add blue. And the way it determines that is it's going to try to make the profile of the picture as neutral as it possibly can. So if you're shooting in extremes and it's heavy shade and it's more of a blue tone, the camera is really going to compensate by adding a lot of orange to try to get you back to neutral. And while that might be something that you want to do sometimes, a lot of times when we're shooting, neutral isn't the color we're going for. We want it to be how we see it artistically. So that's where Kelvin can really come in and help. So just to kind of roll through a couple of these. So these are pretty common on most cameras. I shoot, again, like I said, with the Sony a7R III. The daylight, and you could kind of watch the slider over here for the temperature. The daylight setting is going to add, here we go. Go back to auto. So the daylight is going to add a little bit more blue to it. It's thinking it's daylight, it's sunny, it's orange, so it's going to add some blue, just a little bit though. Cloudy is going to add some warmth to it because it assumes that, hey, it's cloudy, it's overcast, that means it's already blue in the scene. Let me add some orange. Shade's going to add even more orange. Tungsten, meaning an orange light, an incandescent light, is going to add, does anybody know what we would do if it's super orange? It's going to try to make it neutral, so it's going to add blue. Okay, obviously this wasn't shown with tungsten, so you can see it's adding a lot of blue. And fluorescence kind of in the middle, so it's going to add some more blue, and flash, same deal. So basically all they're doing is going from adding either more warmth or adding more cool. Okay, so we're talking about doing this in camera and getting this done properly so that we can play with it later and utilize lights and different color temperatures of different lights to get a different feel and vibe for the image. So basically all your camera is doing is additive color adjustments. So you are adding a warmer color to a blue scene to make it more neutral, or you're adding a cooler tone to a warm scene to make it more neutral. That is it. For this setup, I basically took my front light and I set it to 3200 Kelvin. So it's going to give me a very warm tone. Now in the background, I use twinkle lights, again from Amazon. Everything I buy I think is from Amazon. Twinkle lights that I use are probably around 5500 Kelvin themselves. They're on the blue side, but I wanted them to be bluer. So I really don't have a ton of options to make the lights bluer. They don't change. So what I can do though is set the color white balance on my camera to make the lights appear bluer. So if they're 5600 and we want them to be more blue, we would set the Kelvin temperature to a lower value. So what that's going to do is add blue to help try to neutralize the yellow. So if my Kelvin temperature is at 3200, it's going to be adding a lot more blue to counteract that orange that we see. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn on my main light. I'm going to set my main light to 3200, which is a very orange color, and it's going to make the mannequin here, my test subject here, seem orange as well. But I'm going to go ahead in my camera and I'm going to change the white balance from 5600 to 3200. So now 3200 to my camera is a neutral color, but anything that's bluer than the neutral color is going to be very blue. So it's going to make the background and the lights even more blue. You can use the cheaper lights that come on Amazon, where I think they're like $30 to $50, and you can buy some of this. Is a color correction gel. These come in different packs. This one is Roscoe. I like Roscoe. They've been around forever. But basically, this is going to this is going to give you a very yellow color cast, just like I would get if I set my light to 3200 output for Kelvin. Okay, because remember, 3200 would still be fairly warm. So if you have an LED laying around and you don't have a bicolor changer, or you can't change the color, they're usually around 5500, 5600 Kelvin. So you would just want to put this on here to get the same effect that I got from changing my one light to a 3200. So another thing that I utilize quite frequently is an app called ISP EVO, and I don't like work for them or get anything for this. This is just an app I found that works really great. And basically what it does is you're able to point it where your light is, and it tells you your actual Kelvin. So if you're trying to get the camera to match the scene exactly, then you can use the number up here to figure out what that is and dial it into your camera's Kelvin, which is super convenient. And this is pretty accurate. I really like it. I use this a lot when I'm doing my creative color balance, just so I kind of know what's going on. I have a hard time again seeing colors, so this really helps me to know if something's more warm or something's more blue. So you could do the same thing with your Kelvin and natural lighting. For this one, I used the clear light as well, also set to 3200. The outside light temperature is right around 4000 or so. It's a very neutral color, but I wanted it to look more blue, and I wanted to really add to that scene. I just set the main light to a very warm temperature, 3200. I set my camera to the same exact matching warm temperature, 3200, and it will make the already cool outside look even more blue and more cool toned. So that is it. That is all I did. And then if you don't have lights to play with, and you can do this with flash, you can do this with basically any kind of light, even ambient light. If you're a natural light shooter, you can still really benefit from using Kelvin temperature. As you can see here, I am showing you what the auto white balance is on my camera, and then I'm showing you what my dialed in Kelvin temperature was. I can just look at the scene and I know that if it's too warm, that I'm going to lower my temperature setting on my camera until it is the color I want. And if it's too cool, I'm going to increase the color temperature setting. So if my scene was 4800, I would increase the Kelvin temperature in my camera, because that would add more warmth and that could make it look like a sunset picture. That's something I do a lot. If it's something where I want to add blue, like I did in this picture here, this picture is simply shot with nothing other than just straight light, okay? But the color temperature I shot was very low Kelvin, so that it brought up the blues in the picture. It made the scene look blue, so it looks more like moonlight or like a gelled light. So this is something I definitely recommend doing, is playing between these kind of warm tones and cool tones first, even if it's just natural light and nothing else, just kind of to get the feel for the Kelvin. Now that you know how to use your white balance correctly and creatively, I want to show you just a couple other things I do in camera that really can change the way the photo looks. I get comments all the time about like how my photos look dreamy or glowy and that kind of thing, and I want to show you guys how I get that. I do use that with the creative white balance because it kind of ties it all together. Now you can use it on auto white balance, but with some of these methods, when you place the thing in front of the lens, it's going to make your auto white balance off. Well, if that's what you're going for and you want to try that, cool. Otherwise, you want to be in Kelvin like we talked about, and then you can place the things in front of the lens. So one of the things I like to use a lot to create a dreamy effect is Cellophane. Use it to cover the entire scene and give it a glowy look, different color, especially if you're using iridescent like I have here. Put a hole in it, shoot through it, however you see creatively fit. It can do a lot of really cool effects. It's fun, it's really easy, it's cheap, and I mean, it's something you can definitely start using today. Just kind of the best thing I can tell you is it works the best if you're using brighter light and the light's directed at the camera. So really good for backlit images or images that you're using rim lighting on. Another effect that I like to use is putting petroleum jelly on a filter. So just so you know, never put petroleum jelly, or I use chapstick too because it's just easier. Never put that directly on your lens unless you don't like that lens and you never want it to really work properly. Always use a cheap filter. You can get, I got these off of Amazon. I think they're around like $8 to $12, depending on which size you need. The way that the light is diffused within the lens is really different, and it really can depend on how you're shooting and where you're shooting, and you get so many cool effects. So I highly recommend getting a cheap lens filter and just putting petroleum jelly on it, playing with it. Start with a really thin layer and leave yourself some room in the center. And as you're shooting, you know, change it up, play with it, and see what you like and what you don't like. You can have, you know, they're cheap enough where you could have 10 of these laying around like I do, and you can just kind of pick them up and go with them. The other thing is you don't have to put it onto your camera. You can just kind of hold it up and shoot through it. That's what I do most of the time because I like being able to kind of change the shape of, you know, the blooms and whatnot. The thing I would recommend is shooting this on a 50 millimeter, a 35 millimeter, or maybe even all the way up to like an 85, somewhere in that range. If you go too wide, like a 24 like this, it doesn't quite look right in my opinion. And if you go much longer than that, it could still look really good, but you'll need to have a wider like less stuff in the center. Basically, the wider the lens, the less of the effect you're going to see, and the longer the lens, the more of the effect you're going to see on the same, you know, nothing has to change here, but wider lens like this, you won't really see it as much. If I put this on a, you know, 105, it's going to be extraordinarily blurry. So keep that in mind, play with it. It's another thing that you can play with that can create lots of different effects. So another effect that I absolutely love is blooms or starbursts. And you guys can see that in some of my images here. It's just a really cool effect, and it definitely is unique and kind of will set you apart. So basically what it does is it creates a bloom, which is like a concentration of light, and it does that by these tiny little, I don't think you can see them, but they're basically little hatch marks that are crossed, and it just directs light. It's very simple. These are actually really cheap. I think I picked up a set of 3 for like 20 bucks on Amazon, and you want the kind that spin, and the reason you want that is that so you can kind of adjust the direction of your beam so that if you're doing like a face or something, it's not, you know, right in their eyes. It does take a very concentrated light source to get the effect to happen. So it's definitely something that you'll play with and kind of learn from, but I'm going to teach you how to do a bloom very easily without a flash. I use flash mostly in mine. I usually just throw in speed lights or something like that because it's very easy to get a bloom from this. And of course you want the light aimed at the lens. I went ahead and I put the lens onto my camera here, and you can not really tell any difference in terms of quality. I do think it makes the image a slight bit softer, but with something like this, that kind of makes sense. I mean, it's still sharp as hell. So, but you'll see now if you get a concentrated light source, it will give you the bloom here. And this is why, whoops, I don't have this all the way. Screw that in. Are you ever gonna screw in? Thanks. So it'll give you the light source. See, this is this is what it does, which is really cool. And the adjustments, see, that's why you want the ones that turn. I mean, you don't have to. You can go with the cheaper ones, but I mean, for like 20 bucks, just get it. So I usually have my assistant hold the light for me and and basically shine it past my client back into the camera here, so you can see no matter where I'm at, I'm gonna get that. It's pretty cool, right? I do work on most lenses. I have tried them from my 24 all the way up to I think 200, but they work best on your typical boudoir lenses, which is 35 or 50. But this is on my 24 right now, and you can see it still works relatively good. The cheap version that I'm about to show you, where you take some fishing line, make a cross pattern, and just tape it to your lens hood. This works great on like a 50. I would show you on my 25, but it's just too wide to do anything. But obviously, if you put something like this on a 50 and you have the same type of light coming through, you will get a very similar effect. Not quite as cool as this. This gets some different colors and whatnot into it, as you can see. Whereas this really doesn't seem to, from what I've, ascertained, but it's still really fun to play with if you don't want to go spend 20 bucks on a filter. Well, I hope that you guys learned something. Again, I know it's kind of a basic concept, but so many people don't shoot in Kelvin and they shoot in auto white balance, and it really does make a huge difference on your workflow and how your images look later on, especially if you're somebody who uses presets and you're using the same kind of settings on multiple images. This technique really, really helps. So again, if you have any questions or you want to tell me something or comments, leave them in the forum, message me, whatever you want to do. I'd be happy to answer them. So I look forward to seeing what you guys create with this, and yeah, make some magic.